The courtroom fell into a stunned silence as Amara Williams stood tall, her bloodstained scrubs a defiant badge of honor. Across from her, Judge Whitmore's gavel hovered midair, her icy words frozen on her lips, unable to dismiss the truth that had shattered her prejudice. In that moment, the world wasn't looking at a tired nurse, they were witnessing a woman who refused to be broken. The clock struck exactly 9 a.m. at the Jefferson County Courthouse. The air inside was thick with tension, the kind that seemed to seep into the walls and settle deep in the bones. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity, bodies shifting uncomfortably on the polished wooden benches, murmurs floating like smoke across the room. All eyes were glued to the main entrance, waiting, judging, already deciding who deserved sympathy and who deserved scorn. It was supposed to be a routine custody hearing, but nothing about today felt routine. And then the heavy double doors creaked open. In walked Amara Williams, a 36-year-old black woman, her posture weary yet unbroken. Her light blue scrubs, once pristine at the start of her shift the night before, were now stained with dried blood and dirt, testament to the life-or-death battles she fought daily in the trauma center at Riverside Medical. Her sneakers were worn thin, the laces frayed and barely tied, dust clinging to their soles. Her curly hair was hastily tucked into a messy bun, strands escaping around her determined face. Her eyes, though rimmed with exhaustion, held a fire that could not be extinguished. She walked forward, step by step, the sound of her shoes muffled by the whispers and raised eyebrows that followed her every movement. She knew she looked out of place. She knew that in this place, appearances spoke before voices ever did. Yet she had no choice. She had come straight from a grueling 12-hour shift where a 6-year-old boy, clinging to life after a brutal accident, had needed her hands more than she needed a change of clothes. At the far end of the room sat Ethan Caldwell, her ex-husband, a man whose tailored charcoal gray suit and confident smirk spoke volumes. Ethan was a white man of privilege and influence, his family's wealth woven deeply into the fabric of Jefferson County. Today, he sat poised, weaponizing his spotless image against her exhausted, bloodstained reality. At the bench, Judge Claudia Whitmore presided, a woman in her late 50s, known for her rigid adherence to decorum and her chilling lack of empathy. Her pearl necklace gleamed against her crisp black robe, her silver hair was arranged meticulously, not a strand out of place. She adjusted her gold-framed glasses, her sharp blue eyes narrowing as Amara made her way to the plaintiff's table. Without giving Amara a moment to even settle in, Judge Whitmore cleared her throat, the sound slicing through the low murmur of the crowd like a blade. "Miss Williams," she said, her voice icy and laced with disdain, "this is a court of law, not an emergency ward. Do you believe it is acceptable to present yourself here in such?" Her eyes traveled slowly, contemptuously over Amara's blood-stained scrubs, apparel. A wave of whispers rippled through the courtroom, punctuated by the occasional snicker. Amara's heart hammered against her ribs, but she lifted her chin slightly higher, refusing to let the shame wash over her. She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could, the judge cut her off. "I expect proper respect for these proceedings. Your attire is not just inappropriate, it's insulting to the dignity of this court." Amara could feel the heat rising in her cheeks, not from embarrassment, but from anger. She could almost hear the silent judgments flickering in the minds around her. Poor. Disrespectful. Irresponsible. It wasn't the first time she had faced such assumptions, but facing them here, where justice was supposed to be blind, cut deeper than any scalpel. Across the aisle, Ethan leaned back in his chair, smug satisfaction playing at the corners of his mouth. This was the narrative he needed, the messy, tired, overworked mother, contrasted against his calm, polished perfection. He said nothing, but his posture spoke volumes. At Amara's side, her attorney, Marcus Hayes, leaned in and whispered urgently, "Stay calm, Amara. Let them see who you really are." Amara nodded slightly, drawing in a deep, steadying breath. When Judge Whitmore gestured for her to respond, Amara rose slowly to her feet. She faced the bench directly, her voice quiet at first but gaining strength with every word. "Your Honor," she said, her voice unwavering, "the scrubs I'm wearing are stained with the blood of a 6-year-old boy who was alive today because I didn't stop to change clothes." I came straight from the hospital because saving his life mattered more than how I looked." Her words struck the room like a thunderclap. The murmurs abruptly died, replaced by a stunned, heavy silence. Even Judge Whitmore's practiced composure faltered for a fraction of a second, a flicker of uncertainty passing over her face. From the back of the courtroom, unnoticed by the main players, Samantha Reed, a 23-year-old law intern, sat frozen. Her heart pounded as she watched the scene unfold, outrage simmering beneath her calm exterior. Almost without thinking, her hand slipped into her jacket pocket, retrieving her phone. She opened her camera app and hit record, angling the lens just so, capturing Amara's dignity standing tall against the heavy weight of judgment. The seconds ticked by, each one crackling with tension. Samantha uploaded the short clip onto TikTok moments later, tagging it with simple but potent words, "Black nurse shamed in court after saving child's life." She added hashtags that she knew would spread like wildfire, #Justice for Amara, #Scrubs Save Lives, #End Bias. Within minutes, the video exploded across the internet, igniting a firestorm of outrage that blazed beyond the courthouse walls. Outside, people began gathering, drawn by the growing swell of anger and solidarity. Nurses still in scrubs, construction workers, teachers, parents, people from every background came together, rallying under hastily made signs: "Compassion over clothes, hero, not criminal, justice for Amara." Meanwhile, inside the courthouse, the atmosphere grew more suffocating. Judge Whitmore shifted uncomfortably on the bench, clearly feeling the shift in the room. Yet pride kept her spine rigid. Ethan whispered something to his lawyer, Charles Benton, both of them exchanging looks that spoke of recalculations and concern. Amara sat back down slowly, her heart still hammering, her hands trembling slightly under the table where no one could see. She wasn't naive, she knew her words alone wouldn't erase the biases entrenched in people's minds. But today, for once, she had refused to bow to them. She had forced them to look at her not as an image or a stereotype, but as a human being. Marcus gave her a slight nod of encouragement, his expression proud and fierce. Across the aisle, Ethan's self-assured mask began to crack, a shadow of uncertainty creeping into his eyes. The court would take a short recess before hearing opening statements, but the battle lines had already been drawn. And as Amara sat silently in that old wooden chair, surrounded by eyes that were finally beginning to see her, she knew this fight wasn't just about custody anymore. It was about dignity. About truth. About refusing to be silenced ever again. In that packed courtroom, where power and prejudice had long held sway, the silent strength of one black woman had begun to turn the tide. The heavy wooden doors of the Jefferson County Courthouse swung shut behind Judge Whitmore as she recessed briefly, but the atmosphere inside the courtroom remained electric, charged with a restless energy that refused to dissipate. Amara Williams sat still in her seat, her hands clasped tightly together beneath the table, her bloodstained scrubs a silent yet deafening testament to the battle she had already fought that morning and to the greater war she was now entrenched in. Around her, the murmur of voices grew louder, the lines between curiosity and outrage blurring with each passing second. Outside those thick courthouse walls, the tide was shifting at a pace no one could have predicted. Samantha Reed's shaky video of Amara's confrontation with Judge Whitmore had already exploded across the internet, and in real time, national news outlets picked up the story, flashing Amara's weary yet unbowed figure across television screens and social media feeds from coast to coast. The image of a black trauma nurse, publicly shamed for saving a life, struck a raw nerve in the American consciousness, one that had long been rubbed raw by years of injustice. By the time Judge Whitmore returned to the bench, the courthouse steps outside were no longer empty but filled with a growing sea of protesters carrying hand-painted signs that read "Scrubs Save Lives, Compassion over Appearance," and "Justice for Amara." Judge Whitmore adjusted her robe stiffly, clearly aware of the shift in atmosphere, yet unwilling to fully acknowledge it. She rapped her gavel sharply, calling the room back to order, though the ripple of resistance was impossible to fully silence now. Charles Benton, Ethan Caldwell's sharp-suited attorney, rose smoothly from his chair, his expression cold and calculating. Benton had built his entire career on exploiting cracks in character and perception, and today he planned to paint Amara not as a hero but as an irresponsible mother who prioritized strangers over her own flesh and blood. He moved to the center of the courtroom, his voice dripping with polished sarcasm as he began, "Ladies and gentlemen, while no one here denies Miss Williams's commitment to her profession, one must ask, at what cost does her dedication come? Can a woman who spends 12 hours saving other people's children truly have the energy, the focus, the stability to properly care for her own?" The words floated in the air like venom, intended to burrow into the minds of everyone present. Ethan Caldwell leaned back, smug and satisfied once more, believing the tide was turning back in his favor. But Amara sat tall, her spine straight, her eyes unwavering. She knew this tactic well. It was an old, tired playbook, using a black woman's strength against her, twisting her dedication into a weapon. When it was her turn to speak, Amara stood, steady and proud. "Every life I fight to save reminds me of my own children," she said, her voice even but powerful, carrying to every corner of the packed courtroom. "I don't see their faces as strangers. I see my own son. My own daughter. When I save a life, I am living the values I teach my children every day: compassion, courage, and sacrifice." A hush fell over the room, and even Benton faltered slightly, momentarily thrown off by the depth of Amara's quiet truth. But he recovered quickly, preparing to strike again, until the rear courtroom doors opened with a soft creak, and a new figure entered. Dr. Isabel Morales, Chief of Trauma Services at Riverside Medical Center, walked confidently toward the witness stand. Her presence was commanding without being ostentatious, her crisp white coat draped over her professional dress, her hair pulled back in a severe bun that only emphasized the kindness in her dark eyes. Under oath, Dr. Morales delivered testimony that would burn itself into the memory of everyone present. She spoke of the boy Amara had saved, the severity of his injuries, the desperate chaos of the emergency room, the critical decisions that Amara had made with clear, calm precision that ultimately snatched the child from the jaws of death. She spoke not just of Amara's medical skill but of her unmatched compassion, her tireless spirit, her fierce dedication to her community and her family. "Miss Williams," Dr. Morales said, her voice thick with restrained emotion, "is the kind of nurse every doctor dreams of working alongside. She is not only capable, she is extraordinary." Judge Whitmore shifted in her seat, her gaze flickering, no longer able to hide the growing conflict within her. Across the courtroom, a few spectators wiped at their eyes, and the previously judgmental stares turned contemplative, even guilty. Yet the final blow to the old narrative came not from Dr. Morales, but from a simple piece of paper. Marcus Hayes stood and requested permission to submit a letter into evidence, a handwritten note from the parents of the boy Amara had saved. Judge Whitmore hesitated, then nodded stiffly. Marcus unfolded the letter carefully and read aloud. "Dear Court, we are the parents of Mason Riley, the 6-year-old boy brought into Riverside Medical early this morning after a terrible accident. When we thought we were losing him, it was Nurse Amara Williams who refused to give up. She stayed by his side for hours, doing everything humanly possible to save our child. Thanks to her, we are not planning a funeral today, we are holding our son's hand. When we learned that she had to rush from the hospital to fight for custody of her own children, still wearing the uniform she wore while saving ours, we were heartbroken. No parent who sacrifices so much for others should ever have her love for her own children questioned. We humbly ask the court to recognize the incredible woman she is. Sincerely, Ryan and Linda Riley." The letter hung in the air like a prayer, and for a long moment, no one moved. Judge Whitmore sat frozen, her face pale, her gavel resting uselessly in her hand. Even Charles Benton looked momentarily shaken, his mouth set in a grim, tight line. Ethan Caldwell's confident facade cracked completely. He looked around the courtroom with dawning horror, realizing the narrative had slipped irrevocably from his grasp. Outside the courthouse, the roar of the gathered crowd grew louder, a living pulse of anger and hope and determination. Inside, Judge Whitmore adjusted her glasses with trembling fingers. She cleared her throat once, twice, then finally spoke, her voice noticeably softer. "Miss Williams," she said, "I owe you an apology." The courtroom gasped audibly. Judge Whitmore continued, struggling against years of pride and ingrained bias. I allowed my personal judgments to cloud my perception today. I judged you on your appearance, not on your actions, and for that, I am deeply sorry. Her words were stiff, but they carried the weight of real, hard-earned sincerity. Across the room, Charles Benton slowly rose, his face ashen. He cleared his throat, glanced briefly at Ethan Caldwell, then addressed the court. In light of the new evidence and the overwhelming public concern, the petitioner, Ethan Caldwell, and I are voluntarily withdrawing our custody claim. Gasps of astonishment rippled through the courtroom, followed by a few scattered cheers quickly silenced by a look from the bailiff. Ethan sat motionless, his face a mask of disbelief and shame. Amara stood still, barely breathing, trying to process what had just happened. Around her, the tide of judgment had fully turned. She was no longer the defendant, no longer the woman being scrutinized and condemned. She was the symbol of resilience, of love, of quiet, unbreakable strength. As the courtroom recessed once again, Marcus leaned close and whispered, "You did it, Amara. You turned the whole world around you." But Amara knew better. She hadn't done it alone. She had been lifted by the small acts of courage from others, the quiet record from Samantha, the unwavering loyalty of Dr. Morales, the heartfelt gratitude of grieving parents, and by the millions who, seeing her battered but unbowed, saw themselves and decided they could no longer stay silent. As she walked slowly out of the courtroom, stepping into the golden afternoon sunlight, the roar of the crowd waiting for her hit her like a tidal wave. Cameras flashed. Hands reached out. Voices called her name. Yet Amara didn't wave or raise her hands high. She simply walked forward, steady, calm, her stained scrubs still visible for all the world to see, her head held higher than it had ever been. This was no longer just her battle. It was everyone's. And it had only just begun. The roar of the crowd outside the Jefferson County Courthouse seemed to shake the very earth beneath Amara Williams' feet as she stepped into the sunlight, her heart still pounding from the storm she had just weathered inside the courtroom. But even as the chants of justice for Amara and Scrubs Save Lives echoed in the warm April air, Amara remained grounded, her bloodstained scrubs clinging to her as both armor and testimony to the life she had fought for that morning and the greater truth she had fought for in that courtroom. Her breath came slow and steady, carrying the quiet dignity of a woman who had withstood judgment not with anger or theatrics but with the unbreakable strength of truth. And when she turned briefly to glance back at the imposing courthouse behind her, she didn't see a building anymore, she saw a battleground, a place where an ordinary black woman had made history by simply refusing to lower her gaze. Inside the courthouse, final formalities proceeded quickly. Almost as if the system itself now wished to wash its hands of the shame it had allowed to fester for far too long, Judge Claudia Whitmore, her voice no longer carrying the cold indifference it once did, formally awarded Amara full custody of her children, her ruling delivered in a tone that bore traces of humility, repentance, and perhaps a deeper understanding that could not be undone. The gavel struck one final time, and with it came a profound sense of closure not just for Amara but for all those who had stood invisible in courtrooms like this for far too long. But even as Amara hugged Marcus Hayes briefly, the warmth of his congratulations washing over her, she knew this was only the beginning. For outside the walls of that building, something far greater had been set into motion. Word spread like wildfire, the story of Amara Williams, the exhausted trauma nurse who stood tall against prejudice and systemic bias, captured the heart of the nation. Her bloodstained scrubs, once mocked as inappropriate, were now hailed as a symbol of resilience, dignity, and quiet defiance. Within days, the American Labor and Service Museum in Washington, D.C., reached out to Amara, humbly requesting if she would consider donating her scrubs to be placed alongside other artifacts that marked pivotal moments in the country's struggle for justice. When she received the request, Amara sat alone in her small living room, the evening sun casting long shadows across the carpet, the scrubs folded carefully in her lap, their stains a tapestry of everything she had endured and overcome. At first, she hesitated, reluctant to turn her private pain into a public exhibit. But then she thought of her children, of every nurse who had ever been overlooked, every mother who had ever been judged, and she realized it wasn't about her anymore. It was about what those scrubs now meant to a nation in desperate need of reminders that heroes didn't always wear capes, sometimes they wore sneakers. with frayed laces and uniforms still wet with the blood of lives saved, so with a steady hand, Amara agreed, and the day her scrubs were displayed behind a glass case adorned with a plaque reading Amara Williams. A symbol of compassion and courage, people from all walks of life traveled miles to stand in front of them in silent respect. Nurses, doctors, firefighters, teachers, ordinary citizens lined up to pay tribute, many leaving handwritten notes of thanks, many wiping away tears as they remembered that true heroism often goes unseen until someone refuses to let it be ignored any longer. But the movement sparked by Amara's courage did not end with a museum display. Galvanized by the outrage and hope ignited by her story, a bipartisan group of lawmakers in Washington drafted a revolutionary piece of legislation called the Williams Standard, a sweeping reform that made it illegal to discriminate against healthcare workers for appearing in court in their work attire following emergency shifts and instituted mandatory anti-bias training for judges and court officials nationwide. More importantly, it enshrined into federal law that professional dedication in fields like healthcare would be honored, not punished. The bill sailed through Congress with overwhelming support, a rare moment of unity in a divided nation. And when it was signed into law, images of Amara's smiling face standing quietly in the background during the signing ceremony spread across every major media outlet, her eyes humble yet filled with a quiet fire that had now changed the lives of millions she would never meet. Hospitals across America declared April 18th as Scrubs Appreciation Day, a day to honor frontline workers who fought battles not just in emergency rooms but in every corner of society where bias tried to diminish their light. On that first Scrubs Appreciation Day, hospitals from New York to Los Angeles buzzed with energy as nurses, doctors, janitors, and aides donned their uniforms with pride, marching through their hallways to applause, gratitude letters taped to their lockers, flowers sent anonymously to break rooms. And Amara, on that day, was back where she belonged, not on a stage, not under blinding lights, but in the trauma bay at Riverside Medical Center, tending to a young girl with a broken leg, smiling warmly as the child clutched her hand tightly. She didn't need the world's spotlight to know her worth. She carried the truth in every beat of her heart. Meanwhile, in Amara's hometown of Eastbridge, Maryland, the city council unanimously voted to declare April 18th as Amara Williams Day, an annual celebration of quiet bravery, resilience, and the power of standing firm in the face of injustice. The announcement was made during a heartfelt ceremony at the town square where hundreds gathered under a cloudless spring sky, holding candles and signs that read "One voice can change the world." Amara stood quietly among them, her children on either side, tears glistening in her eyes as the mayor spoke about her bravery not in terms of headlines or laws passed but in the simple, profound impact she had made on the hearts of ordinary people who now dared to believe that their voices, too, mattered. That evening, as Amara tucked her children into bed, her daughter Maya asked in a small, sleepy voice, "Mom, are you proud?" Amara paused, brushing a stray curl from Maya's forehead, and then smiled, a smile that held 1,000 battles fought and 1,000 more she was willing to fight, and whispered back, "I'm proud of all of us, my love, because now the world sees what was always there inside us." Outside their window, the town square still glowed with soft candlelight, and Amara knew that even after the candles dimmed and the crowds dispersed, the change she had sparked would burn brightly for generations, a living flame carried by every heart she had touched. Because in the end, Amara's greatest victory was not the court ruling, not the law bearing her name, not even the National Days of Honor or the exhibits in marble museums. It was the quiet certainty that she had lived with courage, loved with dignity, and stood tall even when the world told her to bow. And through that, she had reminded America of a truth too often forgotten: real heroes walk among us every day. They just need someone brave enough to show them the way. In the story of Amara Williams, we witnessed more than just a custody battle. We witnessed a quiet, unwavering fight for dignity in a world too often clouded by prejudice. Amara did not win her victory through loud declarations or grand displays of power. She won by standing firmly in her truth, even when every force around her tried to diminish her. Her story reminds us that true strength is not about appearances or titles. It's about character, about doing what is right even when it costs us everything. There's an important lesson here for all of us: never let others define your worth. In a society that often judges by surface-level impressions, by the clothes we wear, the job titles we hold, the color of our skin, it is easy to feel invisible or dismissed. But Amara teaches us that real power comes from within. It's in the small decisions we make every day to act with integrity, compassion, and courage. It's in refusing to bow our heads when injustice stands before us. This story also reminds us that change is possible. One act of bravery, one nurse refusing to shrink in a courtroom, sparked a national movement, a new law, and a cultural shift. Never underestimate the ripple effect of standing up for what is right. You may think you are small, that your voice is insignificant, but history proves otherwise. Amar's story is proof that when you speak truth to power, even quietly, the world will hear you. To those listening today, whatever battle you may be fighting, hold your head high. Your sacrifice, your compassion, your dedication, they matter. Don't let the world's prejudices make you doubt the light inside you. Stand firm, just as Amar did, and trust that even when the road is hard, your courage will not be in vain. You are making a difference, even if you don't see it yet. On behalf of U.S. Daily Story, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for spending your time with us today. Your support means more than words can express. Together, by sharing these real, powerful stories, we are shining a light on the quiet heroes among us and reminding the world that justice, compassion, and dignity will always triumph in the end. If this story touched you, please consider sharing it so others might find strength and inspiration in Amar's journey. Don't forget to like this video, leave us a comment sharing your thoughts, and subscribe to U.S. Daily Story for more powerful, uplifting content. Until next time, remember, real change starts with real people, people just like you. Thank you, and may you walk forward today with renewed courage and hope.